Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thank you so much for being here. You know, it's interesting, only 2% of cases involving poor people accused of crime in Georgia go to trial. Only 2% of all the cases. And I just recently talked about the trial penalty. I was involved in a capital case in Alabama where the plea offer was 8 to 10 years. When the fellow didn't take it, they got the death penalty. And now they're going to execute. The state was willing to be satisfied with 8 to 10 years, but today, because the man didn't take the guilty plea, he's very close to being executed. I next want to introduce Abe Krash, partner at Arnold & Porter, who is a young associate, worked with Abe Fortas on the Gideon case. Fortas demanded a lot, and Abe gave a lot, in educating Fortas about the right to counsel, working with him to shape the winning strategy. But beyond that, Abe Krash has provided us today with a marvelous link to Gideon at the creation. He has told the story of Gideon. I remember a few years ago I taught at Georgetown. He came to my class. He teaches constitutional law there. And he came to my class and he talked about Gideon. And it was spellbinding. Just a few weeks ago we had a symposium at Yale Law School and Abe came and he told about Abe Fortas and the work on the case and the strategy that developed. It was spellbinding. Just last month at the Constitution Project, he was speaking, and there have been a couple of zillion other places where he has gone and told this marvelous story and the characters in it and how it came together. And every time he speaks, it's spellbinding. Even if, like me, you've heard it before, it's still moving and it's still spellbinding. How fortunate for Clarence Earl Gideon that Abe Krash was his lawyer, along with, Abe Krash was his lawyer along with Abe Fortas, and of course the great work provided by John Hart Ely as a student at that time. And how fortunate all of us are to have him with this living history of the case that he provides us. I'm going to bring up Abe Krash. I don't know if I'm going to pose with people like this. All right.
I want first of all to thank Ginny Sloan and her colleagues at the Constitution Project for all their efforts in arranging this splendid occasion. And I also want to thank Jones Day for providing us with this spectacular forum. I am touched by Steve Bright's generous remarks and the tribute. It's a tribute, I should say, not just to me, but to all my colleagues who worked together with me, the team that worked together in writing the brief and whose names are on the brief in Gideon against Wainwright. There were 4 of us. Abe Fortas, who was appointed by the Supreme Court to represent Gideon. John Hart Ely, who was a 3rd-year law student at the Yale Law School and was a summer clerk in our firm, and who later became one of the most distinguished scholars in the United States. Ralph Temple, who was an associate then and later became the chairman of the American Civil Liberties Union, and myself. I'm the only survivor of this quartet, the last of the Mohicans, so to speak. And I accept this tribute, this award, in the memory of my remarkable colleagues who, in the Gideon case. I also want to say a few words at the outset about my friend Tony Lewis. The years past, on the occasion of anniversaries of the Gideon case, he and I were frequently invited to participate in programs. I must say I look forward to seeing him here tonight. I am deeply saddened that he is not here. His book brilliantly captured, Gideon's Triumph, brilliantly captured the high drama of the Gideon case. I submit that it is one of the best, if not the very best book ever written about a Supreme Court case. And if not, it's certainly one of the most widely read. And it's done something else that's very profoundly important. For decades, it has encouraged young men and women to take up the legal profession and to enter public service. If there's to be honor accorded to the persons associated with the Gideon case, I should tell you it belongs in the first instance to the two architects of the case, to Abe Krash, who was appointed by the court, and to Justice Black, who wrote the opinion. Measured by any standard, Abe Krash was one of the greatest lawyers of his generation. You can hear his oral argument in the Gideon case, a superb argument in the Gideon case. It's on tape. Subsequently, Justice Douglas, in his memoirs, said that in the 36 years he was on the Supreme Court, the single best argument presented was by Abe Krash in the Gideon case. Now, bearing in mind that Justice Douglas and Abe Krash were very good friends, even making no allowance, nevertheless, that's very high praise indeed. For Justice Black, Hugo Black, a defense lawyer was a necessity, not a luxury. Black had been a lawyer in Birmingham, Alabama, a very tough steel town at the turn of the century. He'd been a defense lawyer, a prosecutor, a police court judge, and he knew very well from personal experience how important it was to have a lawyer at your side. There was another aspect to Black's opinion. That was the profound empathy he had for persons who were underprivileged and disadvantaged, and that's reflected in the Gideon opinion. During the past 2 months, I have had the opportunity to participate in various events commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Gideon decision. And invariably, at these events, some participant remarks that the Gideon case has failed to fulfill the high expectations we had for it in 1963. I must say that's regrettably true. The Gideon decision did greatly inspire the public defender movement and significantly improve public representation of indigent defendants. But the fact remains that large numbers of defendants are incompetently and inadequately represented. The same point about hopes not fulfilled, I suggest to you, could be made about another great Supreme Court case, the decision in Brown against Board of Education. The high hopes we had about that have not been fulfilled either. But that point does not, in my judgment, denigrate in any respect from the significance and importance of the luster of those two cases. Rather, it should be a wake-up call that we have unfinished business to fulfill the great ideals reflected by those two cases. If the promise of Gideon is going to be realized, then I suggest to you that there's work to be done first by Congress, then by the Supreme Court and the lower federal courts, and then I would say also by the state legislatures, and finally by those of us who are private citizens. One of the most dramatic changes in the criminal law that's occurred since 1963 is the tremendous number of activities that have been criminalized, so that the criminal courts are now inundated, far, far from what was the case in 1963. The criminal courts are flooded with cases that don't belong there. The astronomical number of young black men who are incarcerated is absolutely unacceptable in a decent and just society. Present trends continue. 1/3 of black men with no college education are going to end up in jail. Now, Congress must enact legislation decriminalizing a number of offenses, and that will greatly affect the right to counsel. A number of state legislatures need to step up to the plate and to provide the funds that are needed for decent, adequate public defender offices. The Supreme Court and the lower courts need to re-examine the standard, the very loose standard that's been adopted with respect to adequate and competent counsel. Finally, I should state, in my opinion, there is an underlying political reality that accounts for many of the failures to implement Gideon. Ask yourself this question. Who are the persons who are most adversely affected by the failure to provide counsel? Who are they? They are essentially poor people, members of minorities, people who are uneducated, illiterate, and lacking political clout. Approximately 80% of persons charged with a crime are poor. And over 70% don't even have a high school education. Now, the effective implementation, in other words, there is no effective political constituency for this right. And the effective implementation of the right to counsel, a right which we greatly admire and which is so vital in so many respects. It's going to require the support of the bar associations, of the law schools, of the private law firms, and of other organizations, people of goodwill, who are sensitive to the great need to provide a just and fair society. If that is done, perhaps on other occasions, we will no longer say that the Gideon's trumpet has been muted, but rather we will hear it in a very loud way. Thank you very much.